Welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name is Kathy Madison. I'll be the moderator. I'm with Context Services and CIDM. And as with all of our webinars, we'll give folks just 1 minute to continue to sign on, and then I'll jump in, do a little bit of an introduction, and then turn it over to the team at Bluestream and Ryffine. Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started. And again, my name's Kathy Madison. I'm with Context Services, and Context Services has been around since 1978, and we provide consulting to make your content better for your customers. Everything from helping you with taxonomy, design, content strategy, helping do a DITA implementation, and process maturity. How does your organization compare to other organizations? And of course, we also do user studies and benchmark studies. And through our consulting work, our clients asked us to form the Center for Information Development Management, so they had ways to interact and network with each other, and that's where CIDM came out of. A lot of people don't realize Comtech and CIDM is one and the same. We're the same employees. We all work at both organizations and pitch in on both sides of the organization. And on the CIDM side, we host webinars like the one we're hosting today. We also provide conference events, and then for our members only, we have monthly roundtable discussions on hot topics, and we have a newsletter that we send out just for the members. So on the consulting side, Comtech, our training, we have a couple of classes yet this summer that you can sign up for. Of course, if you're here with Git, you may or may not be doing DITA, but we do have 2 DITA classes going on and then 2 non-DITA classes going on this summer. And we have several other workshops listed. I just didn't want to list them all. We've got a couple scheduled out into October as well. So check out the Comtech training website, and you will get all of the workshops we have. We have several events coming. Hopefully most of you have seen our emails that we had to reinvent the DITA North America, whoops, I don't know what happened there. The DITA North America conference and the DITA Europe conference and the Journeys conference. We've reinvented it, rebranded it, and we're calling it a virtual experience. We just launched the website, all the details of how it's going to work, what we're going to do by having these extended hours. So folks in Europe will get live interaction time and not recordings. So we're super, super excited for Convex. And both of our speakers today are on the agenda for the Convex experience as well. So if you're liking what you're hearing, check out the Convex website and look them up and see what they're going to be talking about. But before the Convex event happens in September, we do have a summer online conference, and that's a series of traditional webinars. And all the subject matter is about making your content be worth 1,000 words. So it's adding graphics in, adding animation, when to use graphics, when not to use graphics, a lot of good content in the Ideas Summer. And then our traditional management conference is held in November this year, which it normally is in September since everything shifted. And we still do not know if we'll be able to have that live, but we suspect we may be doing a combo on that one, both live and virtual. And we'll know more details on that coming up. We have a couple of webinars scheduled, not as many because we do have the Ideas Conference in July, so we are not doing as many webinars over the summer, and then of course a lot of people are on holidays. So currently our next scheduled one isn't until September. However, get on our email list if you're not, and that way you'll be notified if we do add a few more webinars between now and then. All right, so with that, I am going to turn it over to Rick Page, who is the Marketing and Sales Director at Bluestream, and Frank Miller, who is President and Founder of Ryffine. But before I do that, I want to go over some logistics. We are recording this webinar, and it will be available to you via an email later this week or maybe early next week. And you can always access past recordings on the CIDM website as well. If you do have questions for Rick and Frank, we'll take those at the end and you can type them in the questions dialog box. And Rick and Frank hope to finish up within the hour, including being able to address your questions, but they're willing to stay longer. We have allocated an hour and a half, but like I said, they hope to have it wrapped up within the hour. So now I will make Rick our presenter. Okay, Rick, you should have control now.
Thank you, Kathy. One moment, I'll just share the correct screen, which is that one. And I'm going to pass this over first to Frank, who's going to say a few words. We'll pass backwards and forwards. We'll try and do this as seamlessly as possible, but it's no guarantee it will be as seamless as we would possibly like.
We'll try. We'll try. So yeah, thanks, Kathy, and thank you to CIDM for hosting the webinar and giving us a platform and a place that the community can get together and have discussions like the one we're about to have today. So we appreciate that. I hope everybody's doing well during the pandemic, and as Kathy showed you from the upcoming events, it looks like we're going to be living in the computer for a little bit, but hope to see everybody out there and healthy when the virus allows us to do that and get together in person. So just a real quick introduction here. Kathy kind of already did it already. I'm Frank Miller, president and founder and principal consultant at Ryffine. We do content strategy and structured content implementation work. I've been doing this for about 14 years on the tail end of my journalism career, and I'm based out of Denver, Colorado. So that's just kind of the high level introduction of myself, and we'll talk a little bit more about how some of my experiences are going to inform the discussion that we'll have today between Rick and I. Rick, you take it away.
Thank you very much, Frank. As Kathy said, because she does such a good introduction, I'm the sales and marketing director in EMEA for Bluestream. I've worked with structured content now for nearly 20 years, which seems a long time, and DITA for an awful lot of that, and across lots of markets. So I think both Frank and I bring some different experiences to this, and what we're going to do, hopefully, we're going to throw some ideas at each other. We're not going to fall out. We have some different opinions, and we welcome the feedback from everybody who's on this to ask questions and get this conversation going and looking at what's right for different people, which is obviously different things for different people. So back to Frank to lead on for a little bit.
Yeah, so let's get into it. We'll just going to give you a little context for this conversation. So if some of you might have been on the CIDM webinar that was about a month ago, and it was given by Don Stevens at Comtech and Mark Gross at DCL. What they did was to present the 2020 trends in the information development community and industry, and I believe the sample size of respondents to that survey for 2020 were 252. A lot of good material in that. That's something that you can ask the folks at CIDM for if you haven't downloaded those data and looked at the responses. We've been doing this for 4 years now, and they've got 4 really good years worth of numbers. One that I think frames our conversation today is the one that you see right here, this chart that you see here about content storage. So what you see here is that the two sort of leading repositories are either a CCMS or a source control system like SPN or Git. So they're pretty close there, and out of 252 respondents, that's a pretty good sample size. So what we're going to do is sort of unpack, what are these two sort of majority repositories that people are using to do customer documentation. And if you go to the next slide here, Rick, Okay, what you see here in the trends from 2017 to 2020 is that both have sort of gained since 2017, but you can see my little squiggly lines on trying to kind of map out where is the trend line going. The one on SVN Git looks like it's going up, and based on 2 years worth of flat, the CCMS is flat. So that's kind of an interesting, an interesting way to look at it. I guess we won't know until we see a couple more years where that's really going. But what we can say is that this is the majority of where content is living, and we really want to understand if that Git trend is going to continue to go up, and is that going to have any impact on the CCMS trend. So our agenda today, if you go to the next slide here, Rick, we think that both of these are legitimate ways to store and manage your content. People had success with both different sort of infrastructures, and it really is going to come down to what requirements lead to as far as choices. So we want to talk a little bit about requirements, but then we're going to get into a little bit of back and forth between Rick and I. We're going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of both approach, and really kind of wrap it up by saying, okay, it really should be the requirements that are driving these decisions. And what are those requirements? Not everybody's got a cookie cutter set of requirements. We really want to make sure that that folks are focused on that rather than the the tool or the acronym that's being thrown around at their organization or their company. We really want requirements to drive these decisions, and we want a way that we can really test out if those decisions are valid, and we want to have good implementations. So that's what the sort of structure of this conversation. I will kind of right now say that as we go into this, is that I'm kind of new to the whole using Git as a repository thing. I mentioned in my intro that I've been doing DITA implementations for 14 years. Most of those have been in a CCMS, and I've always thought that while each product has its strengths and weaknesses, I've always thought that's the way to go. Get that CCMS configured and deployed and trained, and your authors and development team, information development team trained up in the right way, and that's going to get you to where you need to be as far as an organization. More and more we're seeing organizations use Git, and I'm curious about it. And so we've been doing more work in that area, and we want to see, okay, is this going to get us to where we need to go? Can this scale? Got a lot of questions about it. So I'm sort of playing the on the side of Git, playing the devil's advocate with Rick. And Rick works for a CCMS company, so that makes sense that he would take that other side. But we're really, what Rick and I wanted to do is really just surface this discussion that I think people are having on the side, or maybe one-on-one. We just want to bring it public, put it out there in the open, and have the community start to talk about it. So that's my qualifier to say I'm no self-professed expert on how Git is supposed to be implemented and deployed with DITA, but we're learning, and got some experiences and got some things to share with the community. And I think Rick would probably say some of the same things from the CCMS side. So next slide here, let's just jump into this conversation. We want to make sure that the choices we make for our infrastructure fit the requirements of our organization. Every organization has different requirements. Every industry has different requirements. So what are those requirements? What is needed out of our infrastructure, whether it's Git or a CCMS, in order for us to be successful as information developers? So this isn't the list of 300 features and requirements matrix. This is just the kind of high level, these are really important things. But if you look at all 5 of these areas, these are the requirements where there's a lot of nuance. There can be a lot of subtlety in these requirements, and we've got to get those to fit what we're trying to do. So we want to create good content. We want to reuse it. We need process that scales, process that is repeatable, process that everybody on the team, whether it's 8 or whether it's 300, are following. We need to do some pretty complex release management, especially in the software world. We're all striving for automation and personalization in our delivery, and quite a few of us are needing to localize, some in dozens of languages and some in lesser languages. But we do have a lot of organizations that need to do localization. So we're going to frame this conversation based on those requirements, and then talk about these 2 different infrastructure options that we've surfaced in this conversation about CCMS or Git. Which one meets the requirements better? And that's how we launch into this conversation, and that's where I sent it over to Rick to represent the CCMS as fitting the requirements of a modern Tech Hubs organization. Actually, this is, sorry, I missed the slide, Rick. So before we do that, let's talk about a modern infrastructure. Okay, so this is sort of a sample of what a Git infrastructure with DITA could look like. Notice on the right-hand side here, I haven't put anything about delivery on there, but typically the people that we've been seeing that have this sort of infrastructure are doing a lot of automation around their delivery, a lot of automation around their builds. Some of them doing homegrown solutions, some of them doing dynamic delivery platforms like a Zoomin. But that's on the kind of right-hand side, and you could put the open toolkit in that as well. But if you look at this stack here, the thing to take away from this is that all along the information lifecycle, when it starting with planning over here, maybe done in a spreadsheet, all the way through authoring, doing your collaborative reviews, tracking all of these issues, tracking all of your reviews, making sure that you've got good quality with things like Schematron, and then managing that content over on this in the right-hand column here. All of these pieces are really pieces that you're putting together on your own. It's not something that you just go and get off the shelf and say, flip on the on switch and we're ready to go. So these are all different pieces that have their bespoke purpose for what they're trying to do, but we are needing to get those put together in an infrastructure that supports what we're trying to deliver as far as content. So this is sort of what a typical Git and DITA infrastructure would look like. I'll say one thing before we look at the other infrastructure that Rick will talk about with CCMS. I'll say one thing here, that I don't believe that Git and DITA can work without something like Oxygen. And when I say something like Oxygen, I don't know what that other something is. So I'm really saying that the Oxygen, I don't think I could even play devil's advocate unless Oxygen exists. So we're really making a lot of statements here with the sort of implied fact that we're using Oxygen to replicate and to do some of the heavy lifting that a content management system might do if you had a content management system. Okay, so that's why Oxygen is really important in this whole architecture, but it can work, and there are organizations who are getting this sort of infrastructure to work. Now, Rick, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Frank. And I'm sure George and everybody else at Oxygen were delighted to hear you say that, and I actually agree wholeheartedly with you. So if you compare the previous slide with this slide, which you'll be able to do when you look at the recording, the difference, the main difference here is everything is more involved, is included within the CCMS. So that you see some similar components here. We would suggest Oxygen again as the primary authoring tool, but one advantage you would have with a CCMS is obviously you can use other tools, authoring tools. So we actually have a FrameMaker plugin as well. But we are using some of the same components, but we're actually bringing control of this whole ecosystem under a single umbrella. And as a CCMS provider, as Frank said, I do work for Bluestream. We are a CCMS provider, but all CCMSs do a similar thing. I'm not here today to push Bluestream. I'm here for the general discussion. But within this infrastructure here, workflows controlled within the content management system. The metadata management is controlled within the content management system, and localization and everything else. So it's not a need to actually go off and find these other things and put them together. It's a case of it's there, and that's one of the key advantages is a CCMS is putting everything all in one place. And if we go on from there and we actually talk about some of the benefits that I perceive from a CCMS over and above GitHub or Git, obviously it's already built. Anything that you're doing, if you're doing this yourself, is you're putting together the pieces in order to achieve what you want to do. Now, there's some good points in doing that, but there is work involved. It's and it might not work. You need to prove, you need to hope that everything you do actually works. We've been building our particular CCMS for over 15 years. It takes time to get these things right, and we've made mistakes along the way, but we've learned from them. And so if you go and you look at a CCMS, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of hours of development that has gone in order to get it to the point where it is today. And there's people using that same thing. So your system that you create is your own system. There'd be very few people with the exact same configuration as you have. And again, because a CCMS is a product, we end up with this ecosystem. We have consultants and partners who are familiar with the product, and they can support you as you move forward. And the key thing from our idea of this modern tech pubs department where you've got localization needs, a CCMS, in my opinion, is going to provide much superior support on localization. So you will have some, you may have some very complex needs with very complex delivery requirements in 27 plus languages. Doing that off a solid, proven basis with support from the developer is really a fundamental place where a CCMS, in my opinion, is the best approach to take. And again, other things like creating audit trails. Some industries, audit trail is incredibly important. Legislation now changes, being able to prove things, very, very important, that you can actually trace why changes were made and things like that. And also, and again, all CCMSs differ. They're providing the same basic functionality, but I think it's wrong to say that they're all the same, because if they were all the same, there'd only be one in the marketplace. They're all slightly different and they all integrate in different ways, but certainly from an XDocs perspective, and I don't want to keep pushing XDocs, but we're very good at integrating with third-party systems because there's a full set of open APIs that you would have access to. And also, as time's moved on over the years, we're now able, and all CCMSs I think do this now, there's multiple ownership options. So you can have a SaaS system which is going to get you up and running faster than if you're putting it on premise, and we actually will host a system for you as well on within your own infrastructure. So I think this is you, Frank.
So Rick has given you the sort of the pros of the CCMS, and I'll tell you what at least I hear from the groups that that have chosen to go with Git or are really strongly considering. Okay, so the first thing is the cost. If you look back at that trend survey that the DCL and Comtech put out, one of the, I think number 2 on barrier was budget. So, you know, barriers to entry into structured content and doing what you want to do with your business, right? Number 2 was budget. Number 1, I think, was time, but budget was number 2. So cost, as far as something that's out of pocket, as far as spend, is typically lower with Git. Git in the organizations that deploy it for content, it's usually already there. It's there. The development teams are using it. You can spin up a repo to put content in it and get going right away. Now, does that also include the cost for the resources that will maintain and extend your infrastructure? No, but upfront cost for Git is lower than a CCMS. Flexibility and extensibility, I hear that from the organizations that are Git organizations. Hey, we need to be able to extend this and get it to talk to our other systems to we want our content to jump on board here with our build automation, with our Jenkins pipelines. We need to be able to extend our content infrastructure, and Git allows us to do that. And it is flexible in terms of being able to allow different writing teams or different product teams to kind of write in lockstep with development and make some of their own choices, whether it be around the way that they do their branching, or whether it be the way they do their reuse. So it does offer more flexibility and extensibility than a CCMS, where the CCMS just says, you got to work this way with workflows, you got to do reuse in this way. You're kind of bound by what the tools and the UI are allowing you to do. So that's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. The proprietary nature, the third bullet here, really, I think a lot of the vendors, most of the vendors in our space that are DITA CCMSs are good about keeping the DITA pure. But there are implementation choices that have to be made for whatever reason that will sort of inject some specific vendor markup or other into the DITA. And when you're in Git and using Oxygen, you're not really doing any of that. So you're kind of staying away from that particular practice. You're keeping your content more portable and more interchangeable, which is really the promise, the potential, and the really should be the reality of XML. And then the implementation overhead is the last one here that I would hear as a negative to a CCMS. You've got to have provision. In some systems, you got to provision a server. You got to go through a lot of speccing things out. You got to learn the system in order to understand how you want it configured. You got to go through a lot of work up front to get it implemented. Once it's implemented, that's great, but those times can vary. I think that is one of the things that I hear as well. So those would be the sort of counterpoint to what Rick just mentioned. So if I was going to take a look at Git on the next slide here as a sort of antidote to those issues, I already kind of mentioned this list is pretty much an inverse of those weaknesses. I think we can address all of these, or the people who go into Git think they can address all of these with with some strong data and some strong experience around the cost, as I mentioned. Git's relatively, license free for the most part. So I've heard, somebody say, instead of buying the CCMS, our budget needs to go towards making our delivery look better, and we need to spend our money there first. And I only have so much budget. I need the execs to buy into what we're doing, because they don't care if we're in DITA, they don't care if we're in XML. They just want the customer experience to be modern day, up to date, and I've got a limited budget. I'm going to spend it on that. So cost is one. The auto integrations, the flexibility and extensibility of Git is is really up to the aptitude and the skill sets of your content ops team or your DevOps team, or maybe you have somebody that is you're one of those lucky organizations that has that as part of your documentation organization. They can do a lot of really great things with extending a Git infrastructure to get it to do what you want it to do. This third bullet here about standards is kind of what I mentioned with the inverse of the proprietary statement that I made. Not everything is always going to be pure 100%. We're not messing around with the DITA. People are going to write specializations. They're going to do constraints. They're going to do some things to achieve the effect that they want. It's just a little more pure when you're working in a Git and a DITA environment. There's less need to do things that are tool specific when it comes to that sort of infrastructure. The fourth bullet here is a strength that I think is one of the stronger ones that people always mention. This is our culture. We have many development teams in this company that are using Git, and it's expected that even our writers know how to work in Git, that our writers are technically apt at working in this environment. It is our culture. We also have a build your own culture, and this fits better with our sort of our mindset as a company, and that is a strength. If you can get content, treat content as code, and use the same infrastructure, that can be seen as this is better for the company overall. It's better for our culture, and it's better for our end product. And then the last one here is sort of the lightweight distributed strength of Git. This is almost a counterpoint to using SVN, using Git rather than SVN. The experience of a lot of folks in SVN is it's slow, it is clunky, and Git is super fast, and that's really where we're trying to be faster and better at what we do, and Git allows us to do that. So with all that said, just so you know, I'm not a Git zealot. I don't have a Git tattoo on my shoulder, but I do see some of these benefits there, and I'm coming around to seeing, okay, we can do this, and maybe we could scale. We can scale this to large numbers of writers and large numbers of outputs. But Rick, what do you have to say about what I just said?
Well, I would look at it, I agree with a lot of what you say, actually, Frank, and certainly in my experience, I've been doing this for a lot of years. I've seen a lot of people who've started with Git, and because it is by its nature quite quick to deploy, and there's some expertise, particularly within software companies, where you've got that expertise within the organization. I have seen it used. But if I look at it I will be a zealot for this. If I look at this from a CCMS zealot's perspective, there's a few things that I would question, or I would ask the people who've not yet made the choice, who are thinking about which way they jump, to consider. Now, Git wasn't originally conceived to support DITA. It's a happy coincidence that it does, but it's not its primary objective. It's not why it was written in the first place. Now, you could counter that actually by saying that there's some CCMSs that are sitting on technology that weren't originally built for DITA. Although there's this concept with Git that it's free, it still takes time to set up properly. If you look at your diagram where we showed sort of the Git infrastructure, there's all these components, they still need to go together. And I think a big problem or a risk rather than a problem perhaps, is the fact that if you're going down this Git route, you're responsible, your team is going to be responsible for supporting your equivalent of a component content management system. Now, you're relying on developers. They need to be doing their primary task, not helping out tech pubs because something's gone wrong with the system that they've cobbled together. You need that expertise. I've seen also a lot of companies where there has been a true Git zealot, and they have gone in and said, yes, we can solve all these problems, we can do these really great things, and built a really complicated system. And it's been done with other systems before Git was about. And they put this really funky thing together, but it's basically held together with a string and sellotape. And then they'll leave because someone else has offered them another job. And your expertise and the understanding about this unique system, because it's been created for you, your expertise on how that works can just walk out the door. And that can cause a whole different bunch of problems. And there's also, because you're buying different components for this from different companies potentially, there's no guarantee that all of the components that are working happily together today in your implementation are going to still work together nicely in 2 years' time, when one's followed one roadmap and one's followed a completely different roadmap, and that can cause problems. Whereas within a CCMS, all the components are the product together, and so you don't get this risk of a divergence of technology, which is a potential problem if you're relying on a system based on Git, SVN, or another open source platform. And there's also, I question the ability within a Git-based system to support complex localization needs. Now, we work with lots of people with very complicated localization needs. We've done some very clever things recently. And I was on a call about 2 weeks ago talking to a company about localization, and the biggest saving grace that they'd had from using the system was the reporting, the ability to report on what packages of translation had come back, which were complete, what was still outstanding. And that was saving days and days of work for this one individual, because they weren't having to go off and do things manually. So with a CCMS where you've got these greater specifically built reporting functionality and things, I think that's where you're going to get more benefit from the CCMS. And if I move on and we look at we've called these myths. Frank and I have had really good fun throwing stuff backwards and forwards. We agree on a lot, we disagree on some, but we still get on, fortunately, and I think we'll still have a virtual drink at the next conference that CIDM organise, and when we actually get back to normal, we'll spend some time catching up properly. But the idea is that these are problems, you know, as Frank highlighted them. So we'll go through these one at a time. So if we look at cost first, now I agree a CCMS is going to be more expensive when you buy it than if you go off and use Git. Possibly the overall cost in that first year might not be that different, in all honesty, depending on what you're trying to achieve. But bear in mind that if you need that functionality, the CCMS probably has it. If you need it, you're going to have to develop it yourself, and there is a cost to that. There's a cost in both labor, but more importantly, if you're relying on your developers to do this, build this glueware, you're taking your developers away from their primary job, or you're bringing in a developer or an external consultant to help you do this. So whatever you do, it's still going to be costing you money. The fact that a CCMS vendor has a product, they have a support team. that means that if there is a problem, you've got someone dedicated to solve that straight away. They're going to be there. You can be an email, it'll whatever, but you'll be able to get hold of someone and they will be concentrating on solving your problem, because that's their job. Their job is to solve your problems. In an internal system, you're dragging someone away from their job to solve your problems. So year one costs almost certainly will be higher with a CCMS, depending on which CCMS and numbers and various caveats. But with most CCMSs, you would still see a complete return on investment within 3 years, which is very good compared with certain investments that your company will probably make over the coming years. And we've seen that time and time again. I worked with a consultancy prior to joining Bluestream, so I've worn the other hat as well. And getting this return on investment within 3 years is pretty nailed on. If you're not getting a return on investment in 3 years, you haven't got a business case for doing this in the first place anyway, I would suggest. And if we move on to our second myth, this thing about flexibility and extensibility. Again, I believe not all CCMSs are created equal. Some companies have a different perspective as to how they wish to deploy their product and how they wish to continue to engage with customers. But our XDocs, as an example, and XDocs isn't the only product out there that has a complete set of APIs, but we have a complete set of APIs in REST. They're fully documented. We take them away. You know, if you want to integrate the CCMS with something else, you can go off and do it yourself, or you can ask us to do it yourself. And remember, because CCMSs, we've got way over 100 deployments all over the world. So we've done lots of different things over the years to link to other systems. So there's something that you want to do with your system to make it work even better. It's highly likely that the vendor that you work with has already done that in the past. And so it may be quicker. It may be really key and important to do, and something that may take you a long time if you're having to develop it yourself. But if a CCMS vendor is able to turn around and reach back to the shelf and lift something off and it's done, then I think that is actually a benefit that's there. And proprietary nature is a really interesting one. Yes, some CCMSs are very proprietary, and some of the add-on tools that you may wish to use for delivery and things are also, in my opinion, very proprietary. You end up having to go back to the vendor and say, I need this changed, and obviously there's financial and time problems that creates. But to flip it over, it's something's proprietary. It's probably much more reliable as well. So with CCMSs, we are selling a product, and that product has to work. So the reliability in the testing that goes on before we make a release is very thorough. The reaction when there's a problem is very fast. And that is definitely going to be of benefit. And as I said, different CCMS vendors will take slightly different views, but as Bluestream have always tried to expose as much as possible to the users, so that our users, super users, with suitable training, and training is a big thing with any of these systems, can actually configure the system as much as humanly possible as we go through. And then there's the implementation overhead. As I said to start off with, yes, it will be more money initially. It will take slightly longer, but it won't take infinitely, or it shouldn't take infinitely longer to set up a CCMS. Then yes, you can spin up Git quite quickly, but you need to do more in order for that to form a proper solution that's going to deliver to your needs. And so the actual time frame, if you go through the consultancy, if you actually go through a look at what you need to do and understand before you deploy a solution, there's the same thing. It's not a case of going into work on a Monday morning and saying, oh, I think I'll go to DITA today, let's spin up Git, and then we'll start by 10:30. There's an awful lot needs to go on before that. And the manpower required with a Git-based system, I would question, is probably more, because you are trying, if you're going for the full infrastructure, I accept if you're piloting a system to see where the DITA is right for you, Git makes perfect sense to start off with. But you are going to have to put man hours into getting this to work. And it's all about having this existing functionality that is there, as opposed to creating the functionality that you need. So you, Frank.
Okay, all right. So think about what Rick just mentioned here, and I will address the myth about Git. So the CCMS method is a little more tried and true. So there are only 4 there. We got 6 on Git that I want to talk through quickly. We're running up on time, so I'm going to put the pedal to the metal here as much as I can, and address all 6 of these things that from the CCMS side are considered weaknesses or myths about Git. So number 1 is the idea that Git is not designed for DITA. What I would say is that I don't think really any repository is designed for DITA. Whether it's an XML database, it's a SQL, a SQL Server or Oracle, or a NoSQL like Mongo or Elastic. None of these are actually built for DITA. The key thing about DITA and XML in general is that you can have access to the components. I believe that Oxygen does a pretty good job of surfacing components in the DITA content in a way of abstracting away that database. So I don't think that the database needs to be built for DITA. And like I said earlier, you have to have something that can see components, that can search for them, that can track them, that can manage them. And I believe that if you are using all of the capabilities of something like Oxygen around Oxygen projects, using the Oxygen open and find and searching, using the Oxygen reusable components views, if you're utilizing those and basically turning up the volume on Oxygen, then I think that you can sort of abstract away the database side of things. Myth number 2 is about the time that it takes to actually set up Git. Yeah, to really, I agree with this in some ways, that to actually have a good DITA implementation with Git, it does take some time. It takes design work, that the 3rd bullet here. All of those things need to be not just considered, but they need to be done intentionally in order to have a good DITA implementation in a Git environment. So you need to have a good information model, your repo design, branch strategy, workflows all need to be worked out and standardized, unified across your teams so that you can really scale. And then your Git tools, whether it's, there are people having success out there having writers work in command line. Others are saying, hell no, we're not doing that. We're going to use source tree, or we're going to use the Oxygen Git add-on. That's all, those are all choices, but if the thing they have in common is they need to be thoughtfully implemented, they need to be trained up, writers need to be trained up on that, and all the stuff that's underneath that, repo design, branch strategy, information model, the way you're doing DITA reuse, need to be standardized and need to be institutionalized if this is going to work. But you can deploy a Git repo in the 5 minutes after this class and put your DITA content in there and be doing pulls, commits, and pushes with another writer within 5 minutes. Scaling is the big problem there, is the big challenge to work through. Third myth, okay, is the reliance on that internal Git wrangler, whatever you want to call them, the GitOps team, or the, more realistically, it's the 1 or 2 people in the organization who really have developed an expertise around Git, but that also are information development experts, that are DITA experts, that really understand how this infrastructure needs to come together for writers, not for coders. Those people are hard to find, but I would argue that it's also hard to find a skill set that says, that says, I'm an expert in this particular CMS and DITA, and I understand how all this works together. Those people are not growing on trees either. And so we do have, I think, industry-wide, we do have a dearth of that skill set that can really kind of make the technical components of what we're doing sing. And then we're too reliant on DevOps. We're too reliant on IT to make these things happen for us. So I think this is a problem, but I don't think it is specific to Git. I believe it's specific. It's more of an industry problem that we're trying to fix, and we're trying to solve. And I think we've made some headway there, but we're still working on it. Myth number 4 is the idea that we don't have a sort of cohesive, holistic ecosystem out of the box. It's ready to go. That is a nice thing, especially when you're starting out, I guess, to have everything there at your fingertips. But the bottom line is that you usually don't need all that stuff. I've seen a lot of CCMSs that have done really good things, whether it's around workflow or whether it's around release management, that kind of go untouched because the doc groups didn't necessarily need that feature. And so it's not being utilized, or maybe it's so complicated in some cases that it's not even being utilized, so it goes untouched. So with Git, you get what you need. You implement what you need and nothing more. And that's sort of a minimalist way of looking at things, but there is some beauty in that, and there is some efficiency from a business point of view, and only seeing in front of you what you're going to be working with and what the tools of your trade are that are really making you go better and faster. Git myth number 5 is that, I think the point that Rick is making is that if you've got different tools from different vendors, they can update on different cycles, and the roadmaps can diverge to where they're not even what you originally bought them for. And while that's true, I think that can also be true about some of the CCMSs out there. They have reliance on different components and different add-ons and different connectors and things like that. So it's the product owner's responsibility to update it. And this environment, this Git infrastructure is there's a mindset for tech docs that they've got to own this product. If they're going to build this, you're going to build Git and DITA. That's a product that you've decided to build, so you own it. So you got to update it. You got to take responsibility for it. And I think once that sort of mental hurdle is cleared, and the budgetary and the resourcing hurdles are cleared, then I think tech docs groups are perfectly capable of owning this. And I think that problem can be mitigated. And then the last myth here, number 6, localization. This is one that I have a hard time really arguing too much against. I think maybe it's not a myth, or maybe we just haven't done it at the level of complexity that we need to. I will say that if I'm arguing, playing devil's advocate here, a lot of organizations already offload to the LSP. They don't have full responsibility for translations. They gotta package it, they gotta send it out, and they gotta get it back and put it back into their repositories, and then make sure it publishes properly, yeah, that's their responsibility. But there is a bit of a black box going on with the LSP, and that is going to be there in CCMS, as I've seen that, and it's there. It's going to be there in the Git world as well. I have seen some organizations recently use the Oxygen add-on that builds translation packages, and kind of work out a process where there's some efficiencies around that and get it to work. And so I think there's light there. There's a possibility there that some of these issues can be worked out. But this does, just like in the CCMS world, your strategy for deploying your content management system for English content, the information model, the repo, the way that you're doing content in English really has a sort of a multiplier effect on your downstream multiplier effect on your translations. So the cleaner your English Git deployment is, the cleaner you can possibly work with the localizations. But this is one where, I don't have the answers to this. I probably, if I had to plead the fifth on any, it might be this one. But I have seen some people that are much smarter than me that are working it out, and there are some tools out there to wrest more control for the doc teams away from the black box, and get the content in shape to send it over for translation. And there are some teams that are having success with that, and I think it's something we'll continue to work on. So those are all of the, those are the arguments before or for and against both sides. And like I said earlier, this is just a conversation that we want to take different stances on these things. To really, we want to get to the truth. I don't think Rick or I is more concerned about being right than getting it right. We're just trying to get this right, and we want to surface these topics so that we can have these discussions about what is best for a specific organization. So this goes back to our requirements, right? Really what we want to do is make sure that our requirements fit, our requirements are defined before we choose CCMS or Git. So on the next slide, Rick is just going to kind of talk about some things that you should address if you think that a CCMS is right for you. What is the perfect set of requirements for a CCMS?
Yeah, so as part of our discussion, obviously, we've been going backwards and forwards. So we thought it'd be fun to actually write down what we thought would be a nailed on solution one way or the other. So my wish list, if everybody who contacted Bluestream had these requirements, I would be a very happy person. So I think key here is really the first point is, if you don't have in-house expertise in Git or SVN or any other product like that, it doesn't really make sense to invest in it, in my opinion, rather than take something off the shelf. You're probably going to achieve much more, much faster with a commercial product. And again, if you have complex needs, and the complex needs may be you're running multiple concurrent projects, you have very similar products, so you need to do lots of branching and merging, and then consolidation of topics, and you're then delivering your content out to multiple platforms, and you're using that content you're delivering, it's going out in 37 languages, and you're actually delivering using the harder, the hat languages, as they used to be known, these languages in Hebrew, Arabic, Thai, etc., that cause even more problems added to the localization. And the management of really complicated links, so you're using various references between topics, as well as which then need to be picked up when you're sending content off to your language service provider. And actually you need to integrate with other third-party tools in order to improve the authoring process. We do this where we will bring content out of an ERP system or a PLM system into the author an application via XDocs in order to build illustrated parts lists or bills of materials, and this type of complicated need, I think that's when the CCMS, for me, and again, this is a preference and a discussion that we're having, but if you had these requirements, I think this is where a CCMS is actually going to be the product that addresses your needs better. And the next slide will be where Git makes more sense. So,
okay, so this is sort of the checklist of, you know, if with the current profile of shops that are having success with DITA and Git. First of all, it's a culture fit. So a lot of these successful DITA and Git shops right now are in places that say like, well, you know, we make software and we build really good software. Why would we buy software? Let's build this infrastructure on our own. So that is kind of one of the characteristics of a lot of successful Git DITA shops right now. The other commonality is using Oxygen. Oxygen is not just an editor, it's an XML IDE, so you can do all of your, not only do all of your XML work in it, but it really understands the complexities of the DITA architecture, and I think, you know, has what you need if you're going to replace some CMS functionality with an editing tool. And have it do the heavy lift. So the Oxygen presence is right now, I believe, is a key. Aligning with development teams is a priority. That's usually the case at the DITA and Git shops. It's part of the you know, goes back to the culture, but it also goes back to the in-house knowledge and the sort of organizational awareness and intelligence around using Git as a content repo. And then the writing teams, they inject their knowledge of content and knowledge of DITA, and those things can work together. The automation piece is actually really important as well. If there's already automation that is continuously integrating and deploying code, why not do that with content? Heard a lot of people say that. We may as well. We can let's jump on that train and get that to happen, and it makes sense to use that infrastructure, and then we don't have to build it on our own. And then this last piece here is really important. The groups that are successful with DITA and Git understand that it's not the sort of natural language of a writer. We want our writers writing anyway. We don't want them spending a lot of time on technical overhead, managing merge conflicts and resolving merge conflicts and doing a lot of that type of work. We want to simplify it. We want to make it so that they can spend most of their time writing, but we also need to understand that there is a learning curve there. There's training that needs to happen. There are some institutional pieces to put in place. You know, things like office hours for with the Git experts, brown bag lunches around a certain technique in Git, whether it's branches or resolving merge conflicts or pull requests. It's stuff like that that has to be acknowledged that, hey, this is a new thing for a lot of writers, and just because our coders are doing it doesn't mean that that we don't need training on that, right? So really treating it as, hey, this is an important piece that people need to fundamentally understand in order to be successful, and then carving out the time, carving out the resources to do that change management work that needs to happen to be successful. So those are the organizations that are the sort of perfect profile for Git and DITA and the ones that are being successful right now. And you know, it goes without saying they're mostly software shops at this point in time. And where we go from there is probably a webinar part 2. You know, is it going to go into other industries? You know, it's a software world, so most products do have a software component. So I wouldn't rule it out, but most of these are software heavy shops. So our next bit here, we just want to give you guys a quick, just to wrap up here. you know, your roadmap for implementation should be, you know, should be the same if you're doing CCMS, you're doing Git. Define your requirements first. You know, do your use cases, your user stories. Make sure that these requirements are really thought through thoroughly, and that you know what you want to do with your docs, and then go get the solution that you think best fits those requirements. Test it out, pilot it, and you know, don't be afraid to ask for help, especially I would say in the Git infrastructure. That is where, you know, there is a sort of growing body of knowledge around you know, content as code, and using this sort of infrastructure to deliver documentation. So there is, you know, there are some resources out there, but they're not as far along as the CCMS and DITA communities. But don't be afraid to ask for help. There are people who have done this, and there are people who can help you and give you some pointers and techniques and best practices, even though we're just starting out in some cases. So that is it real quick.
Can I just add, Frank?
Go ahead, sorry, Rick.
It isn't possible to overstate how important it is that you understand what you're trying to do before you embark too far down this journey. So this development of use cases and user stories, how your authors are going to interact with the system, but more importantly, what are you trying to deliver to your customers? How are you going to include your subject matter experts within the content creation lifecycle? So you need to understand these things and think about them before you go too far. And test more than one system, pilot more than one system, put two systems next to each other and test them both next to each other. You know, there's lots of ways you can do, but you need, these are long journeys. Any move to get up and running in DITA from a standing start, whichever approach you take, is a long journey. And so start the journey with a little bit of preparation. Put on a decent pair of boots and socks before you go hiking. Make sure you got something to drink. You know, it's preparation. Everything you need to do, you should prepare first, and that's really, really, really important. Sorry, Frank. I will move on to the next slide.
No, that's good. So the thing that I'm going to add to this, and then let's get on to the Q&A, is that I think both of these approaches, both of these infrastructures can be used in the same sort of roadmap. You see a lot of organizations, and these are for people who are starting out that maybe still have their stuff in the desktop publishing and unstructured environment, that are saying, well, we're waiting for this or that or this budget or whatever to get started, and we do know we need a CMS. We know we're going to need a CMS. So, but how do we get started in the meantime? Well, you know, you can start, you know, cleaning up your content, applying minimalism, doing your information design, information model, but you can also start. You can also right away, if you're using Git, you can start to prototype out some repos and some folder structures and some naming conventions. Put your content in there, start reusing it. You know, you can start doing that with very little overhead in preparation for going into that CMS environment and having some good practices in place, having some good techniques already thought through, and it can make you a more effective organization when you deploy your CMS. So I think there's room for both of these to kind of work together at some point, and you know, help groups get involved in this move from unstructured to structured content. Okay, so we're going to skip over our contact slides. If you need to get a hold of us, it's probably pretty easy to do that. And then we're going to go straight to the Q&A. We went way over our 45 minutes, and we're at an hour now. And we did save, I think, some time for questions for those of you who still have time to hang out with us and talk. And we've got about 20 minutes to do that. So, Kathy, thanks for hanging in there. And do we have some questions from the audience that need to be answered?
We absolutely do, and there's going to be some good conversations. But before we go into that, I just wanted to share a little bit more insight of the data that you referenced from the CIDM trend. We looked at hardware organizations, those like machinery company, instrumentation companies, semiconductors, etc., versus traditional software companies, to see how they answered that question. And
Cool.
Absolutely, Frank. You were right. The software team pretty much have 53% using
Okay.
Git versus a CCMS at 33%. And it's almost the complete opposite for the hardware folks at 45% using a CCMS and 35 using, I mean, I got that backwards, 45 using Git and 35 using a CCMS. So we speculated very much like you did about, the software teams want to be closer to their content, the whole code, docs as code, et cetera. And so often they're in the same system.
Okay.
And
cool.
also we speculated with the increase in Markdown, because the trends showed a little bit of that on the rise, sometimes the CCMS can be overkill for that. And so maybe that's a little bit why Git is growing, and because of that, because Markdown. And on the hardware side, something that you didn't mention that we speculated was, we think on hardware, they probably share more content and have to have more reuse and localizations, which you did mention. But the whole reuse idea is something that I think the CCMSs do a little bit better than trying to come up with your perfect naming convention in a Git environment. So, so that all supports what you guys were saying. I just thought it was interesting, extra details from that survey.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some ideas too, maybe for the next survey, Kathy, of maybe some deeper dives into, into specific industries, and also like when I was looking at that SVN Git readout, I wanted to know, I mean, how much really is SVN or Perforce or something like that, and how much is Git? Maybe splitting those out and saying.
That's a good point.
But those numbers are really helpful for us to get a picture of a snapshot of the industry in 2020 and say, okay, what are people dealing with? But you're right about the reuse. That's a big thing in Git in a DITA environment is cracking that nut, and I'm not sure it's been cracked fully to where you can get some food out of it. So yeah, I think a lot of people are working on that. All right, cool. Do you have anything?
All right, there were a couple tools related questions. One, they actually just removed, so I'm not going to ask that. The other one said, you talked a lot about Oxygen, but what about XMetal? Even though that their install base is starting to shrink a little bit, does XMetal offer the same capabilities of
and I don't want to speak for somebody's product, and that would be a better thing to ask Just Systems, because I know they've got some good capabilities around XMetal. But the things that I'm specifically talking about with Oxygen are, first of all, there is a Git connector add-on that works with Oxygen, where you can do some, for now it's pretty basic stuff, but it's maturing. It's on release like 2.2 or something like that. But you can do commits, pulls, and pushes right there in context of the Oxygen interface. I don't believe that XMetal has something like that. There's a couple other things that I don't believe XMetal has, and if it does, I stand corrected. I'm saying I could be completely wrong, but I don't believe that it has something like the Oxygen projects. Oxygen actually allows you to set the context in a project file for just the content that you need for that particular deliverable, for that particular product. So you're basically abstracting away the file system with an Oxygen project. I don't believe that XMetal has that. I also don't believe, because XMetal doesn't have that, I don't believe that you can search on that particular within that context of that project. And you also can't do batch things like batch search and replace, or batch run a schematron check on everything in this project. So I believe that those are the things that kind of set Oxygen apart, which makes deploying Git a possibility with Oxygen, whereas I don't think XMetal has it. But I think I'll take that question, and I'll ask, and maybe I'll find that I have missed something in XMetal.
Okay. All right. So are there a difference between Git and CCMS when it comes to user management? For example, a CCMS easily lets you control who can view and edit content. Git only lets you do that at a repo level. That's what they think. Any comment there?
I think one thing there is a CCMS is designed specifically to do that sort of task. So most will support a roles and projects based user management, so that you can a certain user may have different roles on different projects if you're running multiple projects. And of course, the other thing that a CCMS will do that I don't believe Git does is when you check content out within a CCMS, it's going to lock it, and you're going to avoid the chance of someone going in and making any changes to that. So having sort of conflicts there, but perhaps Frank can answer the roles and user.
Yeah, I think that with CCMS, I think you're right that you've got maybe more robust user management in terms of the grouping that you can do with, you know, in a CCMS, you can do those groups by workflow, by folder, but down to the file. And actually, I think in some of these CCMS, you could do it on the component. You know, you can say this component, let's say this is a reusable note, and I only want these two people to be able to do anything with it. Everybody else just gets to view it. That's really hard to come by in, from what I know, in the Git environment. You can do you can do some fairly I guess fairly sophisticated things around user privileges around pull requests, and you know, granting certain people pull requests and certain people not. But the granularity, I believe, that a CCMS gives you is probably you know, that's an advantage. And you're right. I think most of the user management that you can do is at the repo level, and getting down to that really fine-tuned, granular, you know, component level permission set I think is really probably a workaround in Git for as much as I know. So I think that is probably an advantage. It's good. It's a good point.
All right, what about how distributive teams that use the exclusive lock in version management systems, how do they deal with the fact that Git never locks the files when someone is editing them? And I think Rick started to answer a little bit of that locking issue.
Yeah.
That's another interesting question.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Rick, and then I'll tell you what I'll tell you.
I've said my bit, which was that obviously a CCMS will do that as a default position.
Well, here's what I think. This is where there are still some, you know, maybe processes and maybe some technology that needs to mature a little bit here. But the most common technique that I've heard is to you know, you don't have locked content, so you can be working on the same map, DITA map that 5 other people are working on at the same time. The way, the technique to mitigate that I've heard, and you don't laugh because this is actually what people are doing, is people are doing pulls frequently, pull, making sure that they're always pulling, and they basically are trying to commit when somebody else before somebody else commits, and they're trying to avoid merge conflicts at all costs. So that is the most common method of doing it. I think there might be a smarter way to do it, but I don't have it right now, and that's the way that people are working around it, is basically to avoid any sort of merge conflict, and they're not locking files. So that's just how that's one of the drawbacks.
We got a comment from one of the listeners who said, comparing Git distributed control versus CCMS user control is basically a conflict of philosophy.
Yes.
Good comment. Good comment. Okay.
It is philosophical.
I'm happy to keep going with this, but what I have done, because we might not get through all of the questions, I've popped Frank and my own email address, and the website's up there, so that whilst we're doing some more questions, if anyone wants to drop either of us an email today, tomorrow, the day after, whatever, you've got our contact details there.
Perfect, thanks. All right, there are quite a few questions left. Not sure how many we'll get through, or if people want to just stay on.
Well, can I just answer everything? Well, it's just philosophical, so, you know.
There you go.
No,
This one
okay.
I think is not open, not a lot of discussions. I think this will be a quick one. Can you speak to integration with Salesforce communities from either Git or CCMS perspective, or is that really done at the content delivery side?
Well, I can from a CCMS perspective, but it's from a Bluestream perspective. And if you go to the website and follow the link to resources, there's actually a webinar that we gave with CIDM last year where we talked about integration with Salesforce and how, if you're searching for content within Salesforce communities, you can bring content back from the CCMS as well as the content that's stored within Salesforce's static HTML pages. So to answer that question, I would recommend I'm happy to talk to you offline about that, or if anyone else is at all interested, then on the site under resources, you'll find a recorded webinar that we did April, about 12 months ago, I think. It is something we can definitely do from a CCMS. Right. And if we're doing it, I'm sure other CCMSs have some are trying to do it as well.
Rick, is that on the delivery side? Is that
well, it's on the search. I mean, it follows the talks about really if you're using Salesforce and you're looking for information, because lots of companies obviously are using Salesforce now, and that's become a repository of information. But if the search experience within Salesforce isn't very good, and it tends to bring back static content rather than dynamic content, and so you have restricted navigation. You do a search, something comes back, oh, that's not right, do another search, click on different links, trying to find the right thing. So it talks more about how you can integrate your technical content in a more dynamic way. So the content sits within the CCMS, it lives, it breathes, it grows and changes, but the Salesforce experience then is looking at the technical content, which is then delivered in a more dynamic way. So it's delivered with links and navigation and things. So the user experience is better, but it's worth a look.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and I'll speak to that. I mean, my experience is like whoever asked that question mentioned. Yeah, my experience is that it's on the delivery side, and you know, I can't speak for all of the delivery platforms, but I know Zoomin has a nice Salesforce, an integration with Salesforce communities where you're basically, you know, doing some sort of, with Git, you're doing some sort of, you know, auto integration, you know, Jenkins build that kicks off the Zoomin publishing and then injects that into a Salesforce community, and then you're using the, you know, as Rick mentioned, you know, the search has some drawbacks to it, but the Zoomin search then is able to search on all of your DITA things, your subject scheme, and the way you classify the topic. So that's the application, the implementation that I've seen is on the delivery side, and I'm sure there's some other ways to share, you know, content with the Salesforce community, but that's the sort of the cleanest one that I've seen.
Yeah, and I think Flow Topics has something similar.
I'm sure they do. Yeah, I'm sure Blue does as well.
Yeah. So this is really for Frank, probably. If you have multiple Git repos, you know, you've got them separated by products or components or whatever. What is the best way to integrate several product components into a larger release deliverable? Is it using submodules?
Yeah, that's so. We're trying to figure that out. But we're looking at subtrees, if that's what you mean by submodules. We're looking at subtree as a way to do that. But I think at the repo level, one of the common things that we're seeing where people are having some success is to, you know, manage their reuse content in its own repo, and then align the branch strategy so that they're not that at some point we're all pulling that reuse content into some sort of master branch that combines all of the products. So there's a component of repo design, there's a component of branching strategy there, and then there's also a component of you've got to be able to expose that reusable content across the product groups. So if you have an Oxygen project that has a pointer, the thing about Oxygen projects is you have these directories. Some of them are virtual, some of them are physical, but if you can actually point physically to your common repo as part of your project, you've exposed that content so that authors can reuse it. And then you got to make sure that you're pulling it all together at a certain point. The submodule or subtree thing is something we're learning about as a possible way to handle that and handle the references, the dependencies of the reuse content, so that you can get granular reuse. One of the things that we've noticed about the various groups that are using DITA and Git is that reuse is, as Kathy mentioned earlier, it can be a beast and it can turn into spaghetti very quickly. So you've got to figure out how to manage that. I think what a lot of teams have done is said, well, we're not going to jack everything up, so let's just reuse some submaps and topics, and getting too granular with some con refs or some con keys in too complex a way is going to cause a whole bunch of conflicts with what we're doing, and so they back off out of that. But we got to figure that out, because that is a big reason to use DITA, is to be able to do that kind of stuff. Otherwise, the people who are saying, let's put everything in Markdown and restructure text, and let's just do that, and then in a way that's proven their point. So we need to have that reuse, and we gotta crack that nut. So I know I didn't answer the question, but I can kind of talk to what some of the things that we're trying out. I hope that helps.
Yeah. So this is probably for both of you. There's two requirements that when you guys were talking about the requirements for both. So what about the strong requirement for workflow and GUI-based merging of branching? And then if you have hundreds of development teams that all use different Git repositories, how does that scale? So it's kind of related to the workflow.
Well, from a CCMS perspective, you'll find that they will ship with customizable workflows, so you can build workflows in order to control the entire process. So we typically, well, we actually don't typically, we do ship with standard workflows for things like content review, and which is based on a BPM N2, which is an open standard. From a Bluestream perspective, we like open standards, although I'm here in a way involved with an argument with more against, in some ways, some open standards. We do like open standards, so we use a BPM N2 workflow engine, which means you can create a workflow in any comparable tool and import it into the system for running controls over parts of the authoring process and review and approval publishing process that you may like. Could you repeat the question regarding the other aspects of that, please?
Yeah, there was, there were two parts. One was the hundreds of teams that are using different Git repositories, how does that scale? And then what about the strong requirement for workflow and GUI-based merging of branches?
Well, Frank, did you want to talk about the Git question?
Well, yeah, I mean, what I'd say to that is it's 100 different repos, and each one has their own workflow. That's not going to work. It's just, it can't. And so there's got to be, if you're sharing content and if you're trying to do things in a unified sort of way, I think the docs has to have their own content branch strategy. Even if it's 100 different repos, the docs have to have their own way of doing branches, and it's got to be standardized across those 100 if anything is gonna work ultimately. So that's, I think, what I would recommend, even though there's the desire to work in the same sort of with the same sort of workflow that the development teams are working in. That's just not always possible because we are dealing with different issues in our content. Isn't code. We can treat it as code, but it isn't code. We have different things that we're dealing with. So in some ways, we need our own sovereignty when it comes to the way that we work with our content. And I think that branch strategy is one of those, and that's the onus of the doc leaders to establish what is the doc workflow and how does it work best with the code workflow without mimicking it, because we can all the time. That's my best answer for right now.
Yeah, so there's quite a few more questions, and a couple of them I don't think are short answers. So
Yeah.
maybe you can respond to the folks.
Are any of these short, Kathy? I don't think so.
No, that's what I'm saying. Some of these are not.
I think we can if people are happy to share their details, then obviously if you've got a question that we've not been able to answer, you'll get an answer from myself or from Frank or from both of us addressing your question. That's probably the easiest way going forward now.
And maybe also, Rick, what we can do is take some of those questions and maybe have a part 2, because one of the things that Rick and I have been talking about here is that as we sort of prepped this conversation is, are we at the right level? I'm always concerned sometimes when are we being MOTO? Does everybody know what that means? MOTO, masters of the obvious. I don't know if we're being masters of the obvious here. Are we at a deep enough level to be helpful? So maybe some of these that I'm hearing are a little bit deeper, that get into your repo design, your workflow design, your branch strategy. Maybe we need to, in order to really make this comparison, have a part 2 where we unpack some of those things, because I think that's the secret sauce to making this work, and we could probably get there. So maybe we do that, Kathy. I guess I just signed Rick up for another webinar.
Yeah, that's fine. And I don't know, maybe we could
You're
be
not the first one to do that.
We may have to even be bold and turn people's microphones off and make it a conversation. I don't know. Could get crazy. Yeah, so let's wrap it up. We did get a comment. This was excellent webinar. Both speakers gave great information, pros and cons. Lots of good thanks.
Oh, I'll come back then.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, there's just quite a few more questions that I think it's more advice related questions. What's your strategy to do this? And so I don't think those can be wrapped up pretty quick at all. So.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so I would say then, shoot us an email, or, definitely give those questions to Kathy, and Kathy, we can put those on the list of topics for part 2, and it'll make us think through these things and work them out, and that will be valuable for us all, I think. So, yeah, cool.
Great topic, great presenters, you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for everyone who's attended.
Yeah. And we'll talk to everybody later, virtually.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Kathy.
Appreciate it. Have a good night.